Announcement here.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday. It is the last Sunday of the month, even though it doesn't feel like it. And the fact that it came on the 24th has caught us off guard. And I think David will be here shortly, but right
No,
now
David
there.
said. David sent me an email. Said he was not going to make it. I don't think he. I don't know if he's going to try or not. I don't think so.
Oh, darn. So the slee stack infestation in his lake got worse. It
Okay.
was it was pretty bad out there. He was talking
Yeah.
about when he was going fishing out there, and he had hooked one of them suckers, and it damn near pulled him in the water. And
Ah.
then the babies are out there playing and waving, and it's just a lot to deal with at the same time as you're trying to get ready for a podcast. It's it's a
Ah.
rough world, and
Right. Right.
but look at the bright side. Jim now gets to have a whole hour with me. Yes, Jim. Now, Jim's your voice sounds a little hoarse.
Yeah. I'm a little. I'm a little beat up this week.
Okay, so tell you what, just nod if I say anything really good, and shake your head if it's really bad. Because I tell you what, I am just annoyed as hell at those folks for already dislike the phrase Dodge or Doge, Doge.
Dodge. I know. I
Well,
thought. I thought. I thought it was incredibly fitting. I mean, Dodge. That's a. That's That's another word for con or grift.
well,
Dodge. And I thought that was the perfect. I thought that was the perfect title for a non-official government department run by frauds and cons and grifters and
well, it
so
used to be the name of the leader in Venice, you know, and
yeah. So,
that was and Venice has always annoyed me culturally ever since they sacked Constantinople.
I got to tell you, I probably don't give Venice much thought. I've been there many years ago. God damn, I don't know, it was at least 40 years ago now. And they were having some kind of event there, so there was water in the piazza, and the whole place smelled like a swamp. Beautiful city though. So
Oh, yeah, they
and I got to tell you though, I don't spend a hell of a lot of time worrying about who sacked Constantinople. It's just, I can tell you, in my list of things that are important to me today, that's not real high. I've been to Constantinople too, or Istanbul nowadays, but that's an amazing city. I love being there.
I
That's
that is on my bucket list is to go there. I mean,
It's a fascinating city. Turks are amazing people. I always I enjoyed it. Like anything else, it's got its problems, but Istanbul is an incredibly vibrant city. It's just there's something there for everybody. Something going on in every direction. The food's amazing, and for me, it's probably weird because I'm a me, I'm a coffee freak, and so I'm probably one of the few Americans who like Turkish coffee. And man, I tell you, that's a boy. That stuff will perk you up. Whew, you'll be awake for a month after that. Good stuff, though.
it will. The now I never got to go. I mean, I volunteered to go on an East Coast submarine when I was back in the day,
Oh
um,
yeah,
and so
not a
they
lot,
took my request
not a
seriously.
lot of not a lot of subs sailing up the Dodecanese in this Mumara. Not of a lot of American subs anyway. So yeah, especially
Well,
back then, especially in those days.
I just thought it would have been cool to be on it because there ever I could have taken some leave, maybe seen some stuff, but they put me on a West Coast carrier, so Yahoo.
Yeah.
Uh, so Pam Bondi.
Oh, uh, well, and I mean, this is literally. I knew you were going to get to this. I mean, I'd rather talk about Istanbul or Turkish coffee, but yeah, Pam Bondi. I mean, I will say this. She's horrible. As I say this as somebody who lives here in Florida and is quite familiar with Pam Bondi as Florida. She's as crooked as they come, which means she'll fit right into the Trump administration. I mean, it's speaking of grifters and frauds, you know, um, and we all know the story.
Right.
We all remember from the first time around. Trump was under investigation all across the United States, and for his fraudulent university, and he
Well, yeah, she's
paid $25,000 into Bondi's reelection campaign, and the charges were dropped 2 days later. And so, or the investigation, not charged. There were never any charges, but the investigation was dropped 2 days later. Now I mean, that's the Trump administration. That's Donald Trump all the way around. That's this entire shit show. I will say to you that if my choices for Trump's attorney general are Matt Gaetz or Pam Bondi, I'll take Pam Bondi. At least she's qualified. I mean, at least she's been a state attorney. Gates was barely a lawyer. He was a local ambulance chaser, just like Joe Scarborough before him. Uh, you know, the guy is the guy's not. I mean, he's got a law degree, but it's a joke. Um, he doesn't know diddly shit about the Constitution and anything else. I mean, not that Bondi's going to be great, but I would rather have Bondi than Matt Gaetz. On the other hand, this we're talking about lessers of evil here. This entire administration is going to be. This entire administration is going to be the worst thing that you can imagine. And again, if you're just now realizing that, I don't know what the fuck to say to you. I'm long past the point for apologizing for my language at this point, because after 8 years of this asshole, since he rode down his golden escalator, after 4 years of Trump administration, of hundreds of thousands of people dying from his failed attempt I mean, it is utter, absolute mismanagement of a global pandemic, of his horrible economic policies, of his lunacy of every goddamn day. This guy's in a rose garden and he's talking about electric sharks or whatever ridiculous bullshit he was talking about, right? And 4 years later, Americans are so goddamn ADHD that they've completely forgotten anything about it, and their whole bit is, hey, even if it's fascism, I need cheap eggs. I don't know what the hell to say at this point. We all know how terrible Trump is. We all know. We all know. There are people that wear loincloths and live isolated deep in the Brazilian rainforest that have never seen modern technology or the outside world, who know how terrible Trump is. That's how terrible Trump is. Okay. There are probably creatures with 8 tentacles and squid heads living in Zeta Reticuli 100 light years from here who know how terrible Trump is. There's nobody left on the planet who doesn't know what an asshole this guy is. An ignorant, bombastic, backward, stupid, ridiculous, fascist jackass this guy is. And yet America reelected him anyway. So at this point, I mean, this morning I'm sitting here and I'm looking at NPR, who has done nothing but try to boast siderisms, this stuff, and suck, and then since the election, suck up to Trump in a desperate attempt to preserve their funding. This morning, talking about, oh no, this is terrible. He's talking about cutting NPR's funding.
Dude,
I'm sorry, were you people in a fucking coma? And CNN talking about, oh my God, Trump's talking about reducing the price of eggs, but it looks like his economic policies are actually going to raise costs for people. No shit. Wow, glad you could make it to the party. Where were you people prior to the election? Oh, I know where you were at. They were running, they were too busy running story, the CNN, they got a panel of 20 white men all discussing whether Kamala Harris's laugh is too loud and annoying or something. Those critical issues that CNN managed to cover for the last 3 goddamn months. And now suddenly they're waking up to the fact that this guy's going to come after the press, exactly as he said he was going to do. He's going to every. I mean, again, you just get to a point where you feel like you're the guy at the party repeating yourself over and over again, and people are wandering away because I've run out of things to say about it. You all know how terrible this guy is, and yet 15 million liberals decided he wasn't terrible enough, and he didn't show up. Whatever. The guy won by a handful of votes. Not they're finishing the recount. There's no landslide. There's no mandate. He didn't even get a majority. And as sad as that is, 2,000 less because liberals just couldn't be fucked to get off their ass and go pull the handle on the one day where it actually matters. I mean, people. I sit here in my. Again, if you've ever seen my office, it's screens and data feeds, and I sit here and I look at these people, and today it's just oh my God, they're coming for the trans people, and Nancy Mace's was going to set bathroom policy, and oh my God, Elon Musk and his insanity, and he's going to be cutting $2 trillion out of the government, and people are going to suffer, and the price of eggs are going up, and the price of fuel, and oh my God, all those poor people in Gaza that we love so much, and we're worried about, they're all going to get genocided. None of this is a surprise. You all knew this. You all knew it. All knew it. Okay?
But Jim,
and still couldn't show up. Go ahead. What?
Oh, I was just going to say, but don't worry. CNN couldn't be bothered to talk about his immigration czar pick, talking to Nazi groups out there. I mean, literal Nazi groups.
Again, we live. I don't even know what to call this anymore. You have CNN spent all their goddamn, and it's not just CNN, but I use CNN because they're probably the most egregious bullshit. But
those bastards.
People who spent months interviewing the undecided voter. I mean, I don't know where they found these 6 assholes. These pig shit covered. I don't know where did they find these people? Where did they find them? Behind a dumpster somewhere, right? And none of them were undecided. Every one of these people claimed they were undecided. Weren't undecided. They were Trump voters.
They just wanted to be on TV.
Right, exactly. And the thing is that should have more people. If they were undecided, really weren't undecided. They either weren't going to vote or they were going to vote for Trump. Not one of them undecided people decided they were going to vote for Harris. And there's all of the time. And the worst part about it is that the people who have the big fancy journalism degrees, who are part of these multi-billion-dollar news conglomerates that are supposed to be investigative journalists, these faithless jackasses, sat there like Dana Bash with her microphone sticking out and that look on her face, listening to these people that we all know are goddamn lying, and doesn't say a fucking word. And then afterwards, they're all like, we just didn't see this coming. How could the polls be wrong? They weren't wrong. You literally were interviewing the goddamn people that were blowing smoke up your ass, and you knew they were doing it, and you let them get away with it. And now you want to pretend like it's somebody else's fault. You didn't see it coming. And here we are. And again, this shows you that freedom and democracy and justice and liberty and civilization itself is an incredibly fragile construct. Now, again, this should not be a surprise, and maybe it is to Americans who don't get history in their schools anymore. But throughout history, throughout recorded history of human civilization, as far back as we can go, I mean, all the way back to looking at paintings on walls and caves in France that were put there by a different species of human being. Civilization is fragile. Society is fragile. Freedom, democracy, justice, all of those things throughout our history. If there's one thing that we know is that those things are in danger. They're not in danger. We knew that this time. We absolutely knew that that's what was at stake this time. And 15 million people on the left who all claim that they care about these things, everything from climate change to poor people in Gaza to the security of Europe to homelessness to science to all the things that liberals claim like million of them just couldn't be fucked their ass and go do the one thing the one day that it actually mattered. And again, and it's not just you've heard me say this before. I mean, these same people, the ones that didn't show up, they'll stay. They're probably standing out in the rain right now protesting some habitat laws or something, chained to a tree or an oil tanker or something. They'll do that. They'll do that for 3 months, but they won't go goddamn vote. And it's not just that. I mean, I said this to you before. We go through this every 4 years. You hear this man, this like bizarre daydream of this time the youth vote's going to turn out. The youth never turn out. There's never the youth vote never turns out. 20-year-old people just don't give a shit enough about it. And I'm not blaming them. I was that age too. I didn't care then either. They don't give a shit. You know who cares? Old white people who live in villages in Central Florida. They give a shit. They show up no matter what. They don't know what the hell they're voting for. They pull the ticket straight down the right-hand side, but they show up every time. The 20-year-olds don't. They just don't. And because that's the folly of youth. I mean, we were all that age once. This generation isn't any different than the previous generation. It's not their fault. Or maybe it is. Maybe it's all of our faults. I get yelled at. Jesus, the day after the election, I wrote some stuff and I think about it.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah, we're gonna get to that book. But wrote some stuff, and I got a lot of really angry hate mail from people. And how dare you blame Latinos? Well, I didn't blame Latinos. I did say it was goofy when I saw Latinos on television complaining that now it looks like Trump is going to deport Latinos, and they voted for Donald Trump, and they didn't think they were going to be the people that were getting deported. I do think that's goofy. Do you think that they're the president? No. And then I got an email that said, "Oh my God, you're blaming women." I'm not blaming women. On the other hand, I think it's hilarious when I see them interviewing women on television who voted for Trump, and now they're on television talking about, "Oh my God, he actually is going to take away our rights." Or people of color who same thing, or again and again and again and again, it means responsible for how the election turned out. No, it's all of us. It's 15 million people of all sexes and genders and colors and races and origins and religions and or lack thereof who just didn't show the fuck up. And that's who's responsible. It's the inertia of society of people who think it either it'll be okay because everybody else clean up, it'll be okay because they're in the demographic that won't be affected.
They think they're in a demographic that won't be affected.
Yeah, and again, that's the part, the ironic part that I laugh bitterly at when I see these same people on TV who didn't think they'd be affected, and again, that Martin Niemöller was getting a lot of traction the last couple of days. And first they came for the trade unionists, and I had to speak up because I wasn't the trade unionists, and then they came for the socialists. Here's the thing, man. And people send that to me, and it pisses me off. And I'm like, well, first of all, you should actually read that poem all the way through, and you should actually read about the guy who wrote it, because the Lutheran preacher for Hitler, okay? He was a staunch conservative. He didn't like trans people or the liberalism that was happening in Berlin at the time. It was a little bit more than first they came for. And I didn't say anything. Well, he didn't say anything because he was one of the people who voted for this bullshit until it happened to him. And that of course, is, and don't get me wrong, Niemöller was very much aware of that. And after he turned against Hitler in the 30s camps, it all became very clear to this guy. And that's when he wrote first, then he wrote the actual poem. And that's actually the larger context of Martin Niemöller, is the fact that this guy realized that it wasn't just he was just standing there and they came and got the Jews and hauled them off. As a Lutheran minister, he was one of the guys saying, "Man, I don't like these Jews," and it took being thrown in a concentration camp for him to realize that he was part of the problem. And so that guy. I mean, then he spent the rest of his life speaking out against it, and it's terrible that some of these folks are going to have that. They're going to have to take that same journey. The point of Niemöller writing that poem and writing the hundreds of thousands of words that he wrote after the war about his own journey was so that other people wouldn't make it. And yet the very people that are sending me this goddamn poem every day, and my email is full of this stuff, are the same people that are making the same mistake that Niemöller made in the 1920s. And just completely have missed the irony of sending that poem out when either they didn't show up to vote or they voted for Donald Trump, and now they're like, oh no, it would be me. Well, yeah,
what the hell?
And so again, this is the world that we live in, and so now here we are. And I hate to sound like this, but me, I've always been a cynical son of a bitch, but now it's I don't know. I get thousands of emails a week or DMs or communications, and half of them since the election have said, "What do we do now?" At this point, you're going to ride it out. You're going to have to ride the bomb down, just like Slim Pickens at the end of Dr. Strangelove, waving your hat, whooping and hollering until there's a giant blinding flash. I don't know how that we step back from what's going to happen without violence and collapse and chaos and disintegration. I'm hoping that there's a way, and that way will become obvious. Perhaps will when the true disaster of what we're facing begins, when people become aware of that maybe they'll rebel against it, and we'll be able to step back from it without having to go through what the Germans went through, which was having their entire civilization bombed into goddamn rubble, and then all the people that were a problem killed in the process or hanged at Nuremberg, and then being forced to rebuild their society from the ground up for the next 15 years until they became one of the most civilized and decent and understanding societies on the planet. And even now they're having their own problems. Even now they've forgotten some of those lessons. I'm hoping that we can make that journey without rock bottom, but I don't know if that's possible at this point. We seem determined to ride it all the way down. And again, we talk to people. Again, I've got I don't know how many thousands of communications that say, well, I don't really believe this election was like that. Americans are not really that way. They must have stolen the election. Well, maybe. And I say to you the same thing, and I say to Trump voters back in 2020, show me your proof. I mean, I'm willing to believe rigged in all 50 states, and that this entire massive infrastructure with all these built-in safeguards was diddled. Sure, you're just going to have to show me the proof of it. And so far, no one's produced anything. None of the audits, and basically what it comes down to is that in the end, when they actually audit the election and you look at the exit polls, and the data supports the results of the elections. 15 million liberals just didn't show the fuck up because they didn't care enough, or we all thought that women were going to go to the polls. And I mean, right there, right there before the election, a day or two before the election, they were talking about, you don't have to tell your husband who you're voting for. Like women were going to go to, like, these conservative women were going to go to the polls and vote for Kamala Harris. In reality, what happened was they went to the polls and voted for Donald Trump. And I mean, I deliberately didn't vote early. I deliberately went to the polling station, which is in this enormous Baptist church where I live, with all these Trump signs out front. And there were a whole shitload of single women in line, older women, And I said to my wife, we were standing there, I said, maybe, and I was optimistic that day. I thought maybe, maybe these women are here and there. Because I live in a very, very hardcore right wing Matt Gaetz. I live literally in Matt Gaetz district, for those who don't know. And, um, our former Matt Gaetz district. Right now, we don't have a representative, which is an improvement. And I said to my wife, I said maybe, because I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen a line there before, and then there was a line, and then 50% of them were women by themselves. And I said to my wife, I said, maybe they're right. Maybe these women actually are here voting for Kamala Harris in secret. I don't know. But the election for my district, it overwhelmingly went for Trump. They voted against abortion rights. They voted against the measures that were here on the ballot in the state of Florida. They voted for Trump. They voted for Matt Gaetz. And again, I'm not blaming women. They voted the same way they always voted. What I'm pointing out the fact that we had this sense of false optimism of this blue wave that just never materialized. Though we misjudged this completely. Those people were not going to vote against their ideology, and even though it might cost them their rights, they vote for what their religion and their ideology told them to vote for, and they showed up and did it overwhelmingly, at least in this district. And so, while the election was rigged, the evidence really doesn't support that. The evidence supports the results of the election, which is that Americans overwhelmingly did what the Germans did in the 1920s. They
Jim,
were worried about the price of eggs, and they were worried about the price of fuel, and they were worried about weird alien people coming here from some foreign country and taking all their jobs. And that kind of fear mongering was effective. And I don't know, Trump didn't get any more votes this time than he did the last time. It's just that Harris didn't get the votes that Biden got. And I think things were probably too good. Biden did too good of a job. People were happy. I mean, they voted overwhelmingly for Biden against Trump and threw Trump out of office first time because Trump did such an absolute job. Have ADHD or memory issues or whatever. I can't remember what the hell they had for breakfast, let alone what happened 4 years ago. And so now when people say to them, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Overwhelmingly, Americans are convinced that they're not. And yet they absolutely are. I mean, it's so obvious how much better off you are today, all of us are, than we were 4 years ago. And yet you can't convince people that their perceptions are wrong. And if you try, it pisses them off. They'll vote against you just to own your ass because they don't want to be told that they're wrong, that their perception of the world is incorrect. And yet it's obvious it's incorrect. And so again, here we are. And so at this point, when I see my social media feeds full of people that are all suddenly aghast, oh my God, he picked Matt Gaetz, he picked Pete Hegseth, he goddamn Nancy Grace or whatever, Nancy Mace is on, too many Nancy's, but Mace is on, on their TVs, posting these idiotic signs about bathrooms. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be taking apart our government. And suddenly people are like, oh my God, this is horrible.
well, I think you hit something there, Jim.
Yeah.
The lady from Delaware, I can't remember her name, but when Nancy Mace walked around with her masking tape, making trying to become the bathroom queen again.
Yeah.
That woman actually did what I considered to be the most best thing that any of us can do when faced with that kind of crap. Says, look, let's talk about the important stuff,
Yeah, well, on one hand, yes, on one hand, no. You talking about Sarah McBride, are you? The newly elected trans woman representative from Delaware. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did. And on one hand, yeah, exactly. She said this is an idiotic issue, and we should talk about actual issues. As you said, I think that's great. That's what we should be doing. In fact, I said that this morning on threads of all these things that Republicans claim are an issue: the price of eggs, the price of gas, the goddamn border, wokeism in the schools, blah blah blah, healthcare, the Obamacare, all the, Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, all the shit that the Republicans ran on. I mean, even down to batteries and electric sharks or whatever. What matters most to Congress is who uses what bathroom. I mean, come on. I mean, and that's typical of Republicans. So on one hand, yeah, absolutely, Sarah McBride, high road, and it's not even just the high road. It's the absolutely. It's clarity of purpose and what Congress should be focused on, which are the things that they promised they were going to take a look at, whether you agree with those things or not. Um, and so on one hand, I agree with that. On the other hand, I saw a hell of a lot of pushback from a lot of people that are either in the transgender community or close allies of the transgender community who felt that um, she should fight, and that knuckling under and allowing for segregation of bathrooms is a step backwards. I'm not transgender. I like to think of myself as an ally. Um, at this point, I think I'd be best served keeping my mouth shut about. I mean, Sarah McBride has to do what Sarah McBride thinks is the correct process, and all I can do as an ally is say, "I'm here if you need me." On the other hand, I mean, I think there's probably valid viewpoints on both of those arguments, and I certainly get the outrage at this point. It's the thing is that the honest truth of the matter is that I don't think Republicans give a shit about transgender people one way or the other, either pro or against. I think it's just the most easily attacked outgroup, the most convenient target. Fascism, back up. Fascism always needs someone to hate, and whether that's Jewish people or the Romani or transgender people. I mean, that's one of the first groups that the Nazis came for. The Nazis came for transgender. There was a huge institute for transgender studies in Berlin. Some of the first work that was done on gender and identity. I mean, these were important. This is like Library of Alexandria stuff that we don't even know what was destroyed. And that was one of the first groups that the Nazis targeted because they were easy. Because transgender people are often outcasts, even by people who support them, because it's different. There's some kind of wiring in people's brains that doesn't want to accept that one way or the other, and whether that's something put there by nature or something put there by society, I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things that maybe we not burn this studies and maybe you know study stuff and learn and find out why we feel the way that we feel anyway. I think they're a convenient target. I think they're a convenient scapegoat, and just as I think immigrants are a convenient scapegoat. And you know, I, on the other hand, I will say to you that these and they end in death camps. How this always works, when I think when the Third Reich, the Nazis, National Socialism originally targeted Jewish people, it was because Jewish people were an obvious target that they were an easy group for everybody. We have to remember Germany was not anyway unified this time. The Nazi Party itself was this conglomeration of right wing and left wing hate groups and all kind of coalesced around this hardcore fascist right wing ideology. But that's where the word socialism and that comes from, and it's not socialism the way we see it today at all. But again, there were all these different factions, these different groups in that time, in this post World War I Germany that was suffering massive inflation and this national shame of having been defeated and imposed on them by the rest of Europe, and yada yada yada. And so Jews were an easy bridge across all of those hate groups, because no matter what they hated, it was easy to hate those people, because in many cases they were fairly well off, and they, as a general, as a group, and they had money, and they controlled things like banking, and they had artwork, and they lived in decent houses, and so it was easy to point to those people and say, well, they're the elites, they're the problems, and the rhetoric that was used against them is echoed nowadays against other groups, but that went from being rhetoric to death camps, to to genocide, the murder of 6 million people, and the eventual murder of 12 million people of other groups that were sucked in, the Romani and the and LGBT people and people who are handicapped, and that's the problem. That's there's more. The problem. The problem is hate and using people as targets. I mean, that's the real problem. But the ultimate the ultimate result of this is always genocide. It's always death. It's always death camps. That's always the result of this, of marginalizing people like this, whether it's under fascism or whether it's under communism or whatever ideology that is based on by hating other people. And so in the United States, it's easy to target transgender people because they're such a small group. I mean, you listen to Nancy Mace, and she makes it sound like, my God, like you can't go to a public restroom without there being like a crowd of transgender people all in there having a party or something. I mean, when's the last time you person? I mean, most of the time you probably share, if you shared a restroom with a transgender person, you probably wouldn't know. But they act like this is a thing that's, or their whole bit here 6 months ago where they were all in a panic over drag queens reading stories to children. For the love of God, how often does that actually happen? I thought it was your parent. I mean, how the hell did kids get to the library? How did that happen? I mean, you must have took them there, and so all these things are they're ridiculous on the face of it
Well, there.
until they're ridiculous on the face of it until they become concrete action, until they become genocide, until they become murder camps, until, because of this pervasive mindset. And again, it's just like cheap eggs. Eggs are cheap now as they were for gas might even be lower now than it was when Biden took office. And yet people have burned into their brain, even when they're shown proof of it, they don't believe. And it's the same thing with transgender people using the bathroom. This is a thing that they've never seen, and yet everybody swears it's a thing. God, we got to do something about it. And meanwhile, the actual dangers, the actual dangers. I mean, you're really worried about children. Oh my God, I I don't think that. I mean, I try to look this up. There's we don't collect the right kind of statistics. That's how little this happens, is that we collect statistics on everything, and we don't collect statistics on how often a transgender person attacks somebody in a bathroom, because it happens so little that it's zero basically, right? And yet, if you actually look at the things that endanger children, that endanger women, and men and whatever, 33,000 Americans on average, including a majority of children, are murdered by gun violence in this country every single year. Every single year. Now, at the rate of transgender people doing something to children, for those two things to be equal, 10,000 years would have to go by to equal 1 year of gun violence. And yet, Americans don't think that's a problem. It's about perception. It's about manipulation by people who profit from from fear and from anger and from rage and from manufactured outrage. And again, there's nothing you can't. And someone had said, and I forget who said it, but you can't use logic to reason. You can't reason people out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Very true. This is a situation that we find ourselves in because, and this, I think, more than anything else, this is one of the reasons that the Democrats lost this election because they expect to be people to be reasonable. You go to folks and you say, "Look, man, the seas are rising, the oceans are getting warmer. These are the threats that actually face the United States of America. We get our energy from overseas. We get energy out of the goddamn ground. Sooner or later, that stuff's going to run out or someone's going to get control of it. That's a national security issue. So we should focus on things that can't be controlled. Just from a national security standpoint, let alone an economic standpoint or let's save the planet standpoint. These are the things that matter. You're worried about kids, and then you're telling me you're not going to get your kids vaccinated. You know how many kids died from polio or sterilized by measles and killed by smallpox or goddamn cholera because there's human shit in the drinking water. I mean, these are real concrete dangers that have. I mean, you're worried about children. You're worried about children. I mean, okay, then why haven't we fixed Flint's water system? I mean, if you're worried about children, right? Because we're not worried about children. We don't actually give a shit. We don't actually care. Abortion. You know, I mean, the question in the abortion debate is never should you get. Our whole bit is either it's okay to get abortion or it's not okay to get an abortion. But you never get somebody on your television saying, "Hey, why do people get abortions?" Because those are things that we could actually address. That people get abortions because they got pregnant and they didn't want to be. And so and there's a thousand reasons why that may have happened, but those are all things that can be addressed, and we can change the mindset of this, or we can, without even getting to the should you get an abortion or shouldn't you get an abortion, the question before you even get that far, the research, the question should be why. No, no woman's ever gotten an abortion who wasn't pregnant. I mean, that seems to be a pretty straightforward point right there. I mean, if you don't like abortion, then birth control in every form should be free, easily available, and and promoted in this country. I mean, if you really are against abortion, but they're not really against abortion. It's not about that. It's about control. It's about making people do what you want. I mean, we talk about saving the babies, but you say, well, okay, nobody should get an abortion. Now we got all these babies that nobody wanted. What about that? And we're going to feed them. We're going to clothe them. We're going to give them homes and education and health care. Oh, hell no, we can't do that. Well, then I guess it really wasn't about the babies after all, was it? And again, all of this stuff is not about, it's never about that subject. It's about power and control and a bunch of goddamn people who hate themselves, wanting to stick it to everybody else because they don't like themselves. And that's Elon Musk. That guy, he can never have enough money. He can never have enough power. He can never destroy enough of the government. He can never have enough social media, no matter what that guy does, a big goddamn empty hole in the middle of that sorry son of a bitch that will never, ever be filled, ever. And Trump's the same way. And you start looking at the people that he's putting in power, and they're all cut out of the same cloth, and whatever fundamental differences or outside external appearance they have, they're all the same. They're all hollow, empty people who hate themselves, take it out on the rest of us because of that. These are shitty, terrible people who will never be satisfied. I mean, how much fucking money does Jeff Bezos have to feel like a human being? I mean, how many yachts does that guy have to own? You know, and you look at his ex-wife, and she's busy giving his money away, and she seems to be a pretty happy person. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, this is the society that we've created where, I mean, it's not just that. Our society becomes a reflection of that mindset where, you have to have the biggest truck and the biggest gun and the biggest gym muscles and I mean, these guys, and I see these guys on my social media feeds every day that are, I don't care how much iron you pump, I don't care how many supplements you take, I don't care how many have, they're always these insecure, they're just incredibly toxic, fragile people who are just absolutely terrified all the time that they're not man enough, they're not tough enough, they're not big enough, or they're not, I mean, that's a problem with society. That's why we wound up with Donald Trump, that mindset right there. How do we fix that? The Nazis had this idea that this Aryan ideal of some kind of Greek god perfection, they were gonna, if they'd have gotten their way, if they built the society that they thought they wanted to build. I mean, if you go back and you look at the things that they were, when they, a perfect example is Hitler's design for New Germania, the city that was supposed to replace the capital of the world, this giant, I don't know, this bizarre vision of like Greek and Roman architecture mixed with comic book, you know, I don't know. But one of the things that was in there was this enormous stadium, this gigantic arena, like something that would have just absolutely dwarfed anything the Romans ever built. The Colosseum, you could have put the Colosseum in it and lost it. It was so big, so clouds and stuff inside, and they started building it. The foundations are still there, and it was just this enormous monster arena, and there was supposed to be an outdoor one too, and they would stage, the plan was is that they were going to stage gladiatorial games where the army would fight enemies for the entertainment of the people to continue to perfect the Aryan ideal of manhood. There's no end to that. There's no point where society looks at that and says, "Okay, we're man enough now. We're Spartan. We left enough babies out on the mountain, and and we've eaten enough spinach, and we're tough enough now." There's none of that. There's never a point where there's an end to that, and it gets to a point where that society eats itself, and that's exactly what happens. And you see reflections of that same the incoming administration, but also in American society. I mean, every year the trucks get bigger. Those of you who know me know I drive a Mini Cooper because my manhood doesn't depend on the size of the truck, and I'm of an age where I don't really give much of a shit what you think of me, and um, but I was behind this, or I was in front of this truck the other day. I was on some country road. And the guy was my ass, and this the truck this thing was. I've never seen a truck this big. It's just enormous, and it's like the windshield's like this little slot in the top, like the guy's looking at a tank, and the bumper was. I mean, the air intake in the front of this beast was bigger than my goddamn car, and these are the people that are simultaneously worried about the price of fuel, I guess. But there's a point where you think, well, point where the truck's big enough because you can't. You can. It's like being at the gym, man. You got to pump more iron than the guy next to you, or he might think less of you as a man. And I mean, there's a point where I mean, it's already not sustainable, but there's a point where that mindset especially as a society, it's not simply not sustainable. Where it all which is exactly what's happened every time this particular mindset has become the basis for society, from Sparta to the Nazis to where we are now. How do we change that without burning society to the ground like the Germans did and being forced to start over in the ashes? Honest to God, I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. I don't know I don't know what the point. So there's a cheerful Sunday subject. Don't you have a book to talk about, Bob?
Why, yes, we do, Jim. But you were on
Ah,
such a good rant that it was
yeah,
but it was a nice venting, relaxed. You just kind of, it was like watching a slow draining of instead of a
yeah.
volcano
Slow
erupting.
draining. That's how I am this week. For those of you who don't know, I was horribly ill for a week. I spent all of Monday in bed, 21 hours, and that didn't feel like it was enough. And where we at? Southern Truth. Yeah, and then this is something that I've been kind of lax about, and I wanted to make sure that I said something. Bob's holding up our latest book, Southern Truths. There are a whole bunch of authors in there, a whole bunch of writers, including me, and these are stories from all over the South and slices of life and interesting things. It's probably the best book that Bob's put out, and that's saying something because Bob's really put out some great stuff. And I'm not saying that I was in all of those great things, but the problem was it was released. The problem is that due to the way the publishing world works now, is that for small presses like Bob, it's difficult to it's it provides an avenue to produce books like this that would not have been possible even 20 years ago. But on the other hand, um, the technology and the genre and the industry being what it is, those books are published through things like Amazon. And so when we promoted this, when it came out a month ago, uh, that was right after Amazon endorsed Donald Trump. And so
Well,
things kind of didn't go well. And so, anyway, now that we're kind of past that a little bit, if I can take a second to say that book that Bob just held up is an amazing book. I'm in it. A lot of us are in it. And it's an offset. Those of you who don't know, and since Bob won't tell you, I'm going to tell you. Those of us that are in the book, we take a payment up front. Bob pays us very well up front. And then all of the afterwards all go to support the ACLU. And so that's our way of atoning for the sin of publishing through Amazon. And so if you're buying that book, you're supporting a lot of really great writers. But on the other hand, you're also sticking it right to guys like Jeff Bezos and Donald Trump. So if for no other reason, get off your ass and go buy a copy. All right. I do good there, Bob. Does that work?
well, yeah. Now, okay, what we'll do is we'll take that clip and we'll put it to a thing and you can send it out in an email. But no, Jim is right. I am so damn proud of this book, and not because I wrote any of it, but because uh, Karen G. Anderson, KG Anderson, um, helped edit it. Uh, she uh, did she put the final cover together, and we pull no punches in this book. Okay. It is a great book. It looks at the South, but it doesn't look at the South's illusion of pecan pie and peach cobbler and everybody being polite and courteous to each other. It
I'm,
talks
I'm
about the fact. Do what?
I think my story covers plays, and again, this isn't just we're not bashing the South. It's
Antipodes
simply
was a brilliant piece of work,
thanks,
Jim. You
thanks.
pulled the opposites and allowed us to see them and stretched a whole freaking stream along in between.
Yeah.
Uh, that
I do think it's one of the best things I've ever written. It's not sci-fi. It's a stream of consciousness. It is a walk through this. I live in a very small, very backwater, literally black backwater, because the town I live in is a bite off the Blackwater River, way off the beaten path. We're 10 miles from the highway, and I live in a very small, very deep south southern town, and I'm probably the only guy around here that talks like this. And so the story that I wrote that's included in there is called, well, it depends on how you pronounce it. I pronounce it Antipodes, but everybody knows, and both pronunciations are acceptable. But basically, that's an old word that's not used very much anymore. That means opposites, and that's literally what the story is. It's a a ride through my small southern town, the rich and the poor, and there are some very rich people here, and there are some very poor people here,
but
and yet
let me
they all think that this guy is something, and there's no possible way that he can make both of those groups happy, but they're absolutely convinced that he will. And it's that
well, you know,
dichotomy that we wrote about.
it is a there's some stories in there that will just rock you. There is Larry Hodges wrote us one and says, "I'm a black man and raring to vote in Texas," and it's absolutely. If you haven't read that, did you read that one, Jim?
I read them all. Yeah, they're
Oh,
great. I feel really privileged. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of great writers in here, and me, and so I'm really flattered to be associated with all the stories that are in that book, and I mean that sincerely. There's some really great stuff in there. If you like what I write, you'll really like what these other folks wrote, and you should definitely get yourself a copy of it. Christmas, a copy for your MAGA friends. That's what you should do.
oh, and I will tell you. I mean, I actually have a pile of copies that I give away to people because it's the right thing to do. Now, another piece here on publishing. Um, as Jim said, this BQ Press, with the help of our people like Jim and other writers, Louise Marley, Karen Anderson, so many of them, we have raised and wrote checks to the ACLU for over $6,000. Okay. Now, why is that important? Because right now, if you go to Publishers Weekly, you'll find the report that talks about how Donald J. Trump is already suing publishers who are publishing books negative about him. And if you think that in his off season, if we call it that, is something, wait until he's got Pam Bondi as his attorney general and John Roberts is his Supreme Court, along with Clarence Thomas, and you think that the freedoms and the protections that publishers have from freedom of the press or freedom of speech mean anything to these people, it doesn't. Okay. So this is our way of finding our advocates and putting some money there so they can advocate for us collectively, us, the writers, us, the speakers, us, the people. Now, why is this important? Because on January 19th, the day before the inauguration, we are going to publish another book. Now, this other book it's called Alternative
Oh,
Alternative
God.
Liberties, but it was originally based on Donald J. Trump's what he was calling his second tour in the White House, the Retribution and Revenge, because that's
Retribution
what
and
he said.
revenge. That's right. Yeah.
I am your retribution, he says.
Yep.
And so we're publishing that book. And now Jim has already written, and I've already bought it. I haven't written him the check, but we've got the agreement. Uh, and
Christmas is
we
coming,
are
Bob. Send me the money.
what?
Christmas is coming. Send me the money. No,
Yeah, you'll get the money. You've always got the money because I tell you
I'm,
what, one of the things I love the most is being able to pay the writers, and we're doing one thing on this book that we can only do because people are buying this book, and that is we are paying every writer that submits for this 10 cents a word. Okay,
we're great.
every writer, and that is how we are saying to them, we want your voices. That's why we've got brilliant writers. We have got some great submissions, but we are open for submissions. So if you send it to bcubepress@gmail.com or go on to Moksha Submission at Moksha.io or to my site, you'll find our links to submit. But this is going to be, well, I think this is probably this. Wave the book, Bob, is one of the best books we've ever put together with the help of the great writers we have. Is this next one is going to be one of the scariest but best books we've ever put together. I actually have writers that are seriously not just mock horror. Oh my God, but actually are seriously worried that if their poem or their work gets published, that they're going to be lined up with Jim to be marched into the camps.
Yeah,
But
because
I
I'm
tell you,
definitely getting up. I'm definitely going. I'm already on the radar. So
but I tell you,
come join me. Come
but
join
hey,
me.
Jim
It'll be
needs
the fun time.
company.
That's
And
right.
besides that, when Jim walks up behind the journalist that's in there with him and slaps him on the back of the head and says, "You
Yeah.
son of a bitch, if you'd have done your job,
Well, no,
neither one
all
of
I'm
us
going
would
to say
be
is I
there."
told you so, you son of a bitch. But yeah, that's exactly it. Come join us. We'll be
Well,
the fun camp,
anyway,
I guess.
if I seem animated, it's because I had it all building up. I don't have that slow release like Jim does. Besides that, you know what today is? Today is the Sunday before Thanksgiving. And for those of you with large families who have lived through well, maybe I can stop by for pie, but I promised my second cousin, Harold's cousin, that I would go over there for turkey. And so you wind up with this mad dash around the world on Thanksgiving. We just do our Thanksgiving on the day before, the Sunday before. And so I am going to say, Jim, give us your closing thoughts because then I'm going to go put a turkey in the oven.
Well, my closing thoughts are this, and there are, it's going to be a rough 4 years. There's no way around this. That's how it is. I mean, it didn't have to come to this. We could have. Let me back up. We sometimes look back at history and say, how the hell could that have happened? I mean, the Nazis didn't just happen overnight. The genocide in Cambodia just didn't happen one day. The Soviet and become the Soviet Union. The Russia didn't fall one day and become the Soviet Union the next day. These things took time, and so when you look at like the horrors of our history, you look at things like Nazi Germany and 12 million people systematically murdered on an industrial scale, 250 million other people dead over that conflict, World War II. How the hell did that happen? How did those people back then not see that coming? You know, and the thing is, they did see it coming, and there's tons and tons of literature and recordings of people from that time who saw it coming, who warned people, and yet somehow the world just kept barreling along, and we're kind of in that boat now, where we have. This isn't just Trump. Trump is the he didn't invent the Nazis. He came along after the Nazi Party was established, and he was the loudest guy in the room and kind of took over. And doesn't that sound familiar? The situation that we find ourselves in is a culmination of many, many years of decades of heading down the wrong rails in the wrong directions. you can argue with people where it started, whether it started with Reagan or it started with Nixon or it started, blah, 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 whatever. The bottom is that could have changed direction at any time. And we had ample warning to do so. There's nobody in the world, no group of people, no civilization who had more warning than we did. History has warned us over and over again what will happen if we passively stand by and let this sort of thing steamroll us. And yet, here we are. And so we've passed the points where it's easy to change direction. And now it's going to be hard. But right, justice, liberty, the advance of civilization, those things always prevail eventually. It can be very painful first. And it was very, very painful for the Germans. It was painful for all the people they victimized first. And then it was very, very painful for them. And now they're one of the most admirable civilizations on the planet. I hope that our journey doesn't require us to go through the same pain, but we are going to go through some pain, but we will come out of it on the other end, better people, hopefully. And maybe this is what it takes. Maybe those folks that all yelled at me in 2016, burn it all down, it's the only way anybody's going to learn. Well, I'm not a fan of arsonists. People die in a fire, but ultimately maybe they were right. And it doesn't mean that I agree with it, but the bottom line is here we are. And some of it is going to burn down. And maybe this is what it takes for people to understand just how effective things like vaccines are and how important they are, or why universal, effective public health care for every single person, whether they be a citizen or non-citizen, is imperative. Maybe this is the thing that reestablishes in our minds why liberty and justice must be for all and not just for a select few. Maybe this is maybe this is the point that reminds us the reason that historically when civilization reaches a point like this, whether it be in France or in Russia or in Germany, or even here in America in our early history, why the rich, greedy sons of bitches were eventually dragged from their palaces and hung from lampposts in the street. Maybe this is that point, and I'm not saying that that's what needs to happen, although I don't know that. The bottom line is that we could have changed direction easily, but we didn't, and so now it's going to be difficult. But the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean that it's impossible, and that's what we have to bear in mind. If you lose your sense of hope and your sense of optimism, then you'll never change the future. And so I don't know what the hell the future holds, and I don't know how the hell we get there, but we're going to get there one way or the other, and that's the thing that matters. So, folks, that's what you need to think about. Well, think about whatever the hell you want, but give that some thought as we go into Thanksgiving, and think about the things that you're grateful for. And um, I'll see you next month, I guess. You're up, bub.
Yeah. Jim, that was some of the most profound words that if you were standing in front of on a podium in front of 100,000 people, you'd have 100,000 people just looking at you in silent
well, I don't know
awe.
about 100,000, but I will be on a podium in front of 100 people, maybe a small convention. I'll be in Seattle in about 2 weeks. I don't know what time is it. 2-3 weeks for SMOFCon. I'll be in your neck of the woods.
Which con are you going to?
It's SMOFCon. It's in SeaTac.
SMOFCon, yeah.
SMOFCon, yeah. It's not a big convention. It's a convention for people who run conventions, and we're mostly going to talk about kind of this sort of thing, but how it applies to running science fiction conventions. And I'm really grateful for the folks for inviting me. I'll be the guy there running my mouth about these sorts of things and kind of how they affect the genre that Bob and I love. And so if you're out in Seattle, I might get a chance to see you. We'll see how that works out, and then I'll be
Hey,
back here.
maybe I drive over. Hey, now I want to add one more thing because I got my gas mask hanging on my wall
Oh,
over there from the Black Lives protests. Um, there's going to be protests. There's going to be marches, and I know this sounds overly dramatic, but I think that as this kicks off, the resistance that we show early is going to matter. And if you don't march now, while your marching can have some effect, you may most assuredly find yourself being marched into one of those camps if you turn out to be the third down on the list when they came for whatever. So
right.
just stand up, be bold, don't be stupid, and don't give up. But okay, hey Jim, thank you.
All right.
Okay,
We'll see you folks. We'll see you folks. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays. Um, and we'll see you next month. All right. See you. Bye.
okay, bye bye. Now I just pushed end stream.
Well, there's never any